Satan is one of those words that has a long and twisted history, from a title to a being to a metaphor. And I think Jesus is using that third sense of Satan in Mark chapter 8, where he says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." There's actually this really fascinating interplay that kind of pulls together all of the history of this word, Hasatan, into a very pertinent point that Jesus is making about who he is and what he sees his mission on earth to be.
Peter takes Jesus aside, away from the disciples to rebuke him. Peter turns away from Peter back toward the disciples and rebukes Peter by saying, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, Satan is an interesting term here. It's okay if you think devil, but that's not necessarily what's going on in Jesus' mind. Throughout most of the Hebrew scriptures, Satan, or Hasatan, was not necessarily a person or a being. It's better to think of it more like a title. So the adversary, or the one who opposes, the accuser is a good translation of Hasatan. There's even a passage in the book of Numbers where God opposes a man named Balaam, and the Hebrew literally says that Yahweh stood in his way as an adversary, literally his Satan. Now, it's also true that by the time of the New Testament, a lot of Hebrew ideas are getting mixed in with Greek ideas, and Hasatan was being used to translate the Greek word diabolos, or devil. And you get this Satan devil character that emerges, and that lines up with some of the ways that Hasatan is used in the Hebrew scriptures. You just need to know that every time Hasatan appears, it's not necessarily being used to talk about a personified devil. It might also just being used in the normal sense of an adversary. Here, I think Jesus is doing something pretty unique with that interplay. Remember, it's Peter that takes Jesus away from the group. It's Jesus that turns away from Peter back toward the group. And so when Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan," Peter is, for all intents and purposes, already safely behind Jesus. Right? What I think is going on here is not that Jesus is talking to some devil. It's certainly not that Jesus is calling Peter the devil. I don't even think Jesus is calling Peter his adversary. I think it's that Jesus is using this personified sense of Hasatan that's floating around in the popular imagination to say that sometimes we let certain ideas and perspectives, we let very narrowed imaginations of what's possible, we let bad stories about God oppose the work that God actually wants to do in us and around us. But Jesus also knows very well that that misunderstanding, that's not Peter. Peter is not Jesus' enemy. Peter is not Jesus' adversary. Peter is Jesus' friend. And so what Jesus does is he puts his friend safely behind him and he turns his attention to this triumphalist imagination of Messiah. A story that he knows is absolutely opposed to the lowly way of grace and peace that's ahead of him. And he demands that imagination of the divine, that conquering, trampling, victory at all cost image of God, that picture of the Messiah, that get behind him as well. See, what Jesus knows is that his adversary is not people. Not even people who see the world differently than him. No, those are the beloved children of God that he is here to save. And Jesus will not allow himself to be confused about that because Jesus knows that his adversary is violence and power and coercion and manipulation. Jesus' adversary is victory that looks like the conquering might of Rome. And for the human one to turn his attention toward Jerusalem, he needs to put that story of power at all costs firmly behind him. And that's what he does here. Here's what I want you to know today. There are ideas and there are ideologies, there are aspirations that all of us need to learn to let go of in order to follow the way of peace. But Jesus will never confuse you with the unhelpful ideas that you carry, with the mistakes that you make, with the times that you fall, because those are not you any more than Peter was his misconceptions of Jesus here in this moment. And the goodness of God is the grace that comes to find us even in our bad stories about God, and slowly invite us to embrace better ones.
Hey, thanks for clicking through to watch the video. If you're intrigued by the work that we're doing here at Commons, by all means, give us a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. You can always also jump into our Discord server, where we are inviting all kinds of conversation about the way of Jesus in the world.